Yeah, Jason, are you ready?
Yep.
Just a heads up, it's being recorded right now.
Okay. That's fine. He can erase stuff. Hey, Nancy. Can you unmute her, Megan?
There we go. I'm unmuted.
Sure.
Got to forget that.
That's all right.
How's everyone doing?
Oh, we're a little frantic today. We had recovery coach training this whole week.
Oh, nice.
So
What recovery coach training did you go through?
we went through CCAR here in
Great.
Wisconsin through
Yep.
Apricity.
Yeah, I'm a CCAR trainer and CCAR recovery coach.
So we've been, trying to manage this online recovery coach training and then our workload. And so I didn't do anything with my hair this morning. I got a quick
You're forgiven.
quick try to look halfway presentable for live.
Nice.
All right. So I did not touch what this is Megan, who's also on here. Megan, you should put your face on. So Megan is one of my
Megan.
Wes is off today, which
Okay.
I actually found out as well this morning from Megan. She's like, I think Wes is off today. So I didn't even look at the flyer to know what he put down for topics. And then Megan's like, well, I think he wrote like something with advocacy or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it was kind of like, what we do in Q&A. So, I can wing it. I'm pretty good at that.
Okay, so usually we can do one of two things with our Q&As, and it all depends on the person that we're on with. And usually like someone, like you, we don't worry about. But there are people who come on and they're like, I don't know what I'm gonna say, and they want us to really ask them a lot of questions and like really prompt them to say things.
Right.
Otherwise, what we can do too is we just turn it over to you, and you can just like share your story and then talk about what you do and what makes you unique, just so other people can hear it and they
Sure.
have a resource. So we can do that too, so that we, and Megan and I can just be silent, and then whoever calls in will be able to listen. And then I usually put in the chat, like if you have any questions for Nancy, leave them in the chat. And then if you just want to watch the time, and we'll watch it as well, and like maybe 10 minutes, like within 7 to 10 minutes before 1:30, we stop and say, okay, does anyone have any questions? Well, I don't know what zone you're in, but
I'm Eastern, so
okay, so our 1:30.
That's fine.
Then we just ask if there's any questions, or if anybody has any comments, or if they want to learn more, and then where they can get a hold of you, or or get involved.
I have to actually put that in the chat.
So so we do that, and then I guess that's really about it. We record it, so it's recording right now, and then Wes goes through the recording, and then he'll cut it down, and then he'll post it on the website and Facebook page. And so usually, and then we also send it out like in our newsletter and stuff, so people can catch them later. And it all depends on the day as well, because these are done mid-afternoon. It depends if people have time or not to catch them. Sometimes we have people who will log on and it'll be like 1 or 2 people. Sometimes it's been like up to 20. It all depends. But then afterwards, once we post them on our Facebook page, it blows up. Log in just to watch and see who, like later on when they have time, or when they're making dinner or whatever, they tune in to watch it. So we have a lot of hits afterwards.
All right, that sounds good. So yeah, there we go. So I'll put in my chat my contact information, and so if anybody has any questions.
Okay, I'll make sure I mention that. And then how would you like me to introduce you?
Well, I'm pretty, I mean, it was in the flyer in terms of background stuff. So the little bio was in the flyers. I'm pretty comfortable with kind of just going into who I am and what I do, and I would tie it all kind together to my story.
Okay.
So familiar with that. I can talk, not just about what we do at COPE, but how we got started, what we do in naloxone, the kind of information that we give out in the community. I do talk a lot about trauma connections to substance use, how to teach compassion to the general community about substance use disorder. Also talking a lot about the ACEs, adverse childhood experience, trauma connections, parental grief, what it's like to go through living with a loved one with substance use disorder, as well as the grief process. So I can kind of tie in a lot of different things and we can kind of see, obviously, the more people that are on, the more likely questions, the less people, less questions. So, and it's 20 minutes and then Q&A typically.
Yeah.
I can easily fill that time.
Okay. So do you want them to, if you're saying something and it like resonates with someone, do you want them to interrupt you? Or
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
it's not like I have content that I need to get through or accomplish. It's more about meeting the needs of who's here.
Okay. And then you lost your daughter?
Hmm.
Daughter. What was her name?
Marissa, Marissa.
And how long ago was that?
2012.
2012.
Typically, who attends these?
It all depends. So we have two regular people who attend, and I hope that they're on today. One woman, her name is Bev Kelly Miller, and another woman who her name is Paula Jolly. They both have lost their daughters. And so they're on pretty much every time that we do one. We have a woman named Tina who always logs in. She's a recovery coach, peer support specialist. Her daughter is currently incarcerated, and Tina is raising her grandson.
Yeah, that's another big one.
And then the rest of the people who log in, it's kind of hit or miss. Sometimes we have treatment agencies that log in, like Rogers Memorial Hospital is a big one here in Wisconsin. So we have, their staff will log in. We have some sober houses that log in, and then otherwise, like we have a handful of people I don't even know who just log in.
Okay.
We have recovery coaches from our network who will log in. Yeah, it all depends on, I guess, who sees the flyer or what people are doing.
What part of Wisconsin are you from?
We're from Madison area.
Okay.
Yeah.
And grew up in Illinois, just south of Wisconsin, so.
Megan's also from Illinois.
Where at?
I always say this, but okay, you're actually from Illinois. So I'm from like the Crestwood, Alsop area. Are you familiar with any of that?
I'm northern. Grew up in northern, northwest, way up to the top, just 16 miles south of Wisconsin. So.
Okay, yeah. So
way north.
I'm technically Cook County still, but
Okay.
I'm south. I'm maybe like right off of 294. I'm like maybe
Right.
10, 15 minutes from the Indiana border via the
Okay. Yeah, gotcha. I still have family that lives in Illinois, so that 294 route is
Yeah.
pretty familiar. So what how'd you get involved with those Wisconsin connection?
I actually went to school at UW-Madison,
Okay.
and then I just stayed.
Yeah, it's kind of easy how to be a transplant that way with schools. That's how I got to Michigan. Yeah, definitely a school transplant.
Do we have anybody in the waiting room, Megan?
We have two people that I have no idea who they are, so that's exciting. Of Rob and Jean.
Well, you got two new ones then.
No, you need to stop. This is being recorded. Stop it.
We usually try to go about 1:01-ish.
That's fine.
We have about a minute yet. I'm going to repost on our page that we're going live.
Hey, Jess, do you want me to let them in?
Sure. Hello and welcome to this Friday's edition of our live Q&A. Today we are joined with Nancy King, and I'm super excited about this live Q&A today. I think we may have a couple more people joining us here shortly, so while we wait for that, I just want to remind everyone that we do have live Q&As every Monday and Friday here at Wisconsin Voices, as long as you see the did I say Monday and Friday? Wednesday and Friday. Thank you, Megan. Every Wednesdays and Fridays. As long as you see our posters show up on our Facebook page, we are ready to go and we have our lives happening. So Nancy comes to us today from Cope Network. And I'm recording this as well, so we will be recording this to share later. But Nancy comes to us from Cope Network, and we're really excited to have Nancy today. I met her through a training that we did with Michael King. It was a leadership training. I think that was already a month and a half ago. It feels like summer is already flying by. But I met Nancy, and it was actually a pretty critical time in my life when I almost didn't take the training. My family and I had just endured a significant loss. We had lost a family friend to an overdose, and he was only 17 years old. And I was in this leadership training and just having a terrible time with that loss. And Nancy was there. And we broke out into some smaller groups. And I remember I shared about that loss because I was just really struggling that day. And Nancy reached out to me and said, you know what? I've been there. And this is how I have coped, and this is how I created this movement. And if you need something, please reach out. And so I thought, wow, you know what an amazing gesture of not only empathy, but love, and just, it gave me such comfort. And so I reached out a couple days later and said, hey, would you like to come on one of our live Q&As? Because doing this work for so long, I have met some of the most courageous moms in this business. We have moms in Wisconsin who have lost their kids to addiction, and they have, like we talked about, Nancy and I talked about how there are moms who have lost their kids and just gone on to do these enormous things in our state. And I just have so much admiration and respect for them because they continue to move people beyond where they've been. And so Nancy is one of those people. And I just really, really wanted to get her on to share about what she's doing. And so today we're going to bit differently because I want to give Nancy that opportunity to share everything that she's done, and just to allow her to be able to answer questions. So this format for the Q&A, instead of us asking Nancy questions to get her to answer them, Nancy's going to go ahead and share. She's going to share her story about her amazing daughter who has been lost to addiction. And in doing so, she's going to share what she's done and how she's done all these different projects. And then while she's doing that, if anyone that's listening on the live today has feedback, questions, comments, concerns, wants to know more, just go ahead and interrupt her. She said, I'm an open book. Just stop me during my conversation, and we can have a dialogue. So that's what we're going to do today. This is an open dialogue format. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and formally introduce Nancy King with the COPE Network. And again, Nancy, thank you so much for coming on today, all the way from Michigan to talk with us.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad you reached out. As Jessica said, I am a family member affected by substance use disorder. 2009 is when I learned my daughter was using heroin. And that was a total shock. She had struggled with mental health issues. She'd struggled with depression for a very long time, was introduced to substance use and found heroin. And from that point on, it became really a battle because I didn't know anything. I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know where to turn. And it was a very, very scary time. Unfortunately, in 2012, in January, I got that phone call that no parent ever wants to get, but is always expected. And they simply said, are you sitting down? And I knew my daughter was dead. See if I can do this. This is my daughter, Marissa. She was only 21 years old. And my first reaction was just utter shock. But I hadn't really been quiet about being a parent of a child with a substance use disorder. And the more I talked about it, the more I had other people come forward and said, yes, my whatever family member. The connections were very close. And what that taught me was that I was not isolated. This isn't an isolated incident. It was happening everywhere and to people I know and were affected by this. So after her death, I was determined to not let other parents and other family members go through what I did with this lack of information, lack of knowledge, lack of connection. And my first thing was to help create a support group for families, people in recovery, people seeking recovery, and bring everybody together so we could be at the table and have this conversation together. Because that was something that was lacking in my relationship with my daughter. We couldn't talk about it. And it was also very shameful. It was shameful for her. It was shameful for me. And that's been one of my goals, is to take away the shame of substance use disorder, to take away the judgment, because it's not a bad choice somebody made in their life. There's always underlying connections and causes to substance use disorder. So Families Against Narcotics is an organization in Michigan that I became involved with and started to offer that support group here in our community. But it was more than that. It was too many people were dying. And at that time, we did not have a Good Samaritan law. We did not have naloxone available to community members. So I helped to have that go forward. I testified before the Michigan Judiciary Committee to get naloxone available as what we call a third-party prescription. So in other words, anybody can have it, anybody can use it. And then we also tried to get the Good Samaritan law connected to that. And that was to absolve somebody of wrongdoing if they were using a substance and were responding in an overdose situation. So we do have a Good Samaritan law in Michigan, which means that if somebody is overdosing and there's a call made and a policeman shows up or law enforcement shows up, the person overdosing and even the person who's making the phone call will not be prosecuted. So that was a big step for some of the changes here in Michigan. And since then, we've been able to offer a lot of naloxone. So we developed a naloxone education program. It's an overdose prevention and Narcan. And what we do is we do education. It's very extensive. We're very proud of the program we've done. It includes helping people understand more about the opioid use disorder. It helps people understand the neurobiology or how the brain is affected by substance use disorder. We talk about the underlying connections and causes, and that's dealing a lot with the trauma, especially adverse child experience. We also talk about harm reduction, realizing that not everybody's going to be ready for recovery, but the more we can do to educate them on how to use drugs safely, then there's a better chance that when they find recovery or they're seeking recovery, they're going to be able to be healthier in their recovery process. And then we do overdose prevention and give out free Narcan. And since we started our program in 2015, we've trained over 9,000 people in overdose prevention and given out almost 8,000 kits in the community. We expanded that to include law enforcement. So in Southwest Michigan, which is about 8 different counties, we train law enforcement and firefighters on how to recognize an overdose and respond. And then through our grant are able to give law enforcement and firefighters their supply of naloxone that they can use. And one of the most important pieces to that has been understanding and creating compassion to law enforcement. They're trained in the criminal model, and as too often we've associated substance use and drug use with bad people, that's the mindset they have. So we spend a lot of time trying to help them to understand the underlying connections and causes, and they're not just saving the life of that individual, they're also affecting families, because for every life saved, there are families connected to that individual. And that's really helped kind of see that aha moment for, especially for law enforcement. I mean, they only get to see the devastation. I always tell people when they're in recovery to say thank you to, a police officer, a ER doc, because they need to see the face of recovery. They need to know why these lives are worth saving, because underneath everybody who has a substance use disorder is a person. So we've done a lot to try to help the community to understand substance use disorder. And that's how I created COPE, which stands for Community Outreach Prevention Education Network. So our organization basically provides resources and activities to not just people in recovery, but people seeking recovery and the community at large. So we do brain-based activities, and we have a yoga class, a Tai Chi class, a beginning guitar class, a meditation class. We also offer space to some other community partners who provide other resources for recovery there. But the key to what we do is that everybody is welcome. As long as somebody understands substance use disorder is a medical illness and people do recover, they're welcome to attend the programs. So what this does is it opens up the opportunity for people to expand their network, if they're a person with a substance use disorder recovery, to expand their network into meeting other people outside the recovery community. But also helps to educate the basic community about substance use disorder, where they learn that, oh, these are people. It helps to reduce some of the stigma and thoughts that people have about who uses drugs. So our program has been growing. We are also connected with the courts. So if somebody is attending a drug court and they have court paperwork that has to get signed, they can come and take a yoga class instead of only going to a recovery-based community class like an NA or a Smart Recovery. They can come and take a yoga class. And that also helps to help them, their brain, their body in their recovery process. So we try to have kind of a unique approach to it. But then we also do have fun activities. So 2020 was going to be our expansion year. Well, that's all been put on hold because of COVID. But looking at being able to do things like karaoke and movie nights, and we did a sober Halloween party. But again, it was open to people outside the recovery community to help bring these connections. And that's what's been so devastating about COVID, is that people seeking recovery or in recovery, and even the families, often feel so isolated. And isolation, we know, is a health risk too. So we've seen increasing overdoses, unfortunately. We've seen increasing relapses, and being able to really reach out and help people and to stay in contact and connection with people, even if it's phone calls, if it's through, online chat, if you can do that, is such an important part for our recovery community as well as families. Isolation does not help for recovery. So we want to be able to bring about those connections in a way that is opening up doors. Any questions so far? Just checking the chat here.
Yep, we do have a question actually from Bev, and Bev is one of the women I was telling you about that calls in pretty much regularly, and she's one of my mamas. Bev, if you want to ask your question, you can.
Okay. How did you get your law, the 911 law, passed to not prosecute people? Because in our state of Wisconsin, the person who overdosed can be prosecuted if they don't choose treatment. And
Wow.
the person who calls can be prosecuted if the police suspect that you are the supplier.
Yeah, so those are a couple challenging questions. When we went before our Judiciary Committee, that was one of the most important things, because we knew that people who were at risk of prosecuting, whether they were using along with the person or they were afraid that they would get that person in trouble, wouldn't call the police. And so unfortunately we were seeing people dying because of that. And that was why it was so important that we had that understanding that not everybody's going to be ready for recovery. And when we try to force somebody into treatment, it may be opportunity for them to see treatment isn't so scary, because a lot of times they're afraid of treatment if they've never been there. So that could be, but they can walk out. So even if they're forced into treatment, they can't hold them into treatment. And that just, a lot of times they go and they do what they need to do, and then a day, 2 days later, they walk out, they're not getting anything. So that you either go to treatment or not perspective doesn't increase the chances that they're going to find recovery. So it's really important to make those connections, because as long as we're a punishment society, we're not going to get what we need. Accountability is very different.
Well,
Go ahead.
you're singing to the choir.
Yeah.
I need to sing a different tune to the
Yes.
politicians.
Yes.
Because they definitely didn't listen to what we brought forth.
Well, that doesn't mean you can't continue to change laws. So
Right.
you can look up Michigan law. We adopted and worked from the law that was in Illinois, because they had that prior to us. And we kind of took those as connections to how to write our laws. Now, we haven't had incidents. Well, no, that's not true. We have had incidents in Michigan, but the concern now is coming out of prosecuting somebody who dies. When somebody dies, and that's not fair either. Most people who bring drugs are usually just another person with a substance use disorder. It's not the drug dealer. It's not the people who are doing bringing in large amounts of substances and distributing them. It's usually somebody who's just trying to survive in their addiction. And it's a big concern when we have somebody who they call because they're doing the right thing, and unfortunately that person doesn't make it. To prosecute them for murder does not encourage people to call. So honestly, what we tell people is that you don't admit to the drugs. They don't have to. They don't have to agree to any searches. I always say hide the drugs. They don't have to agree to searches. They don't have to admit that they had a connection to the person's substances that they were using. They don't know how they got it. Plausible deniability, is part of what we teach people, because those are kind of ambiguous laws for a lot of states right now. With fentanyl, they see fentanyl being a greater, more potent substance, that if fentanyl was involved, that increases the risk. Fentanyl is in everything. It's in meth, it's in cocaine, it's in crack, it's easily accessible, it's very cheap. So to say fentanyl is making it worse isn't really helping. So these are the kinds of things that we do have to continue reaching out to our politicians, and to be able to look at the results of your Good Samaritan laws. How are they making a difference? Getting input from people who are still using substances to say, hey, are people calling? Are they just getting access to Narcan and not calling? How many people do you know that ended up in a difficult or potentially worse situation because of this law? And gathering those statistics from your health department, if you have a state level opioid response organization, which we do in Michigan, you can get some of that data. And that's what you have to go back to the politicians. Substance use is not going to go away.
Right.
And the more trauma we have in our society, the more we're going to see the increase of substance use. You add COVID to all this, that's another trauma for our young people growing up. You look at what's happening right now with people of color and Black people, and how they are disproportionately affected by substance use disorder in a criminal way, that we have to realize that we have to stop those kinds of thought processes, because it doesn't help people heal. It only creates more fear and more trauma.
Thanks. The thing is, we have a Republican legislature that is into punishment
Yes.
rather than getting people help and
Yes.
rehabilitation.
Yes.
Even I've begun to call our Department of Corrections the Department of Punishment,
Yes.
because the focus is on punishment
Absolutely.
rather than on correcting behaviors.
Right.
And all they see are the behaviors. They
Yes.
don't see the brain work.
Right. Exactly.
And I go to a lot of treatment facilities to share my daughter's story. And that's where I hear a lot of people telling me, I was prosecuted.
Yeah.
I did call 911. I did the right thing. But now I'm prosecuted. And so I hear the side of the story that politicians don't believe.
Right.
I mean, I've contacted John Nygren umpteen times about this. And when I told him at the signing, why is it like this? He said, it's progress, not perfection. But
Well, there's
his own
change.
daughter is in prison because of supplying to somebody who's pregnant, and the baby died and she died.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, it's important to get these people on board.
Yes, absolutely.
I just didn't know how you did it to avoid the prosecution.
Right. Also, a really important part that we have to do more education on is the trauma piece. So if you're not already familiar, what's called ACEs, or the Adverse Childhood Experience.
I am.
Okay, good. So
I have a master's in psych.
Okay.
Besides doing
Yep.
this.
So that's what we need to really start talking more about, because what we're doing to people by putting them in prison is we're actually increasing their trauma. And that isn't going to help them. We know that too often people leaving prison don't just go, oh, drugs are bad, I shouldn't use drugs again. What happens to them typically is they end up getting back into drugs because they're having a hard time getting a job. They feel a lot of shame because it was never dealt with in their prison. They have more trauma from being in prison. Those are the messages that we have to help them understand, that prosecution for substance use disorder doesn't work. And it's the only medical illness that we think that incarceration will cure a disease. And we don't even treat it equally. If we think of substance use disorder and addiction in the broader sense, things like shopping, eating, gambling, they don't have the same kind of consequence. If somebody is caught and they have a problem with gambling and they're caught in the casino, they don't have a consequence to that. But it's also because of our drug laws. And that's a big part of what we have to understand, is that when we have these punitive drug laws, that makes it different in terms of, but the underlying cause and connections to all addiction is the same. And when we can help to get that understanding and message across, that if somebody has a problem with gambling and they go in a casino, well, they should be prosecuted. No, but that's how we treat substance use disorder.
Right.
So those are the kinds of messages, and starting locally, starting with your local representatives, to affect even how communities are working with it. I'm not sure what your syringe access laws are in Wisconsin, but
it's free to go to the AIDS Resource Center
okay.
and get it. You don't need a prescription either.
Okay. So, and that's pretty progressive. A lot of places aren't, so that's a good thing. But if you can start bringing in that harm reduction approach, if they've already said that harm reduction works, and that having clean, safe, sterile paraphernalia reduces the risk of communicable diseases, then you can start kind of linking those things together, and how we see it as an illness, and how we see the underlying connections and causes. And that's why prosecution isn't a good thing. Opportunity is one thing, bringing opportunity for recovery process, but it is a process. I mean, the average times through relapse is like 10 to 15 times before somebody might start seeking out long-term recovery. And that it's 6 months for the brain to heal and start producing dopamine, where they can start feeling good and starting seeing positive. And it's 2 years before the prefrontal cortex can really take on that ability to say, you know what, bad things are happening, and I need to think about how I'm going to cope with this. I always talk about, I always ask people, if you had a magic wand to make all your pain go away, whether it was physical or emotional, would you use it? And everybody's like, yeah. I said, well, guess what? Somebody who uses substances found the magic wand. The problem is it only works so many times, and then it breaks. And then once it breaks, life becomes out of control. But everybody who has thought about looking for that easy coping mechanism, unfortunately, drugs work, and they work really well in the beginning. And that's a concept a lot of people who've never used drugs or don't have an addiction get. Only 10 to 20% of the population who use drugs will end up with an addiction. Most people can use drugs without ending up with an addiction. But for those 10 to 20%, it's significant. And it's significant for those families too. And that's a pretty high population when we think about it, when we look at the overall numbers. So understanding that people are using drugs and they're not getting in trouble, there's not a problem. But if they're using drugs and there's associated problems with it, the behaviors that they look at, lying, cheating, stealing, those types of things that happen for survival reasons, then we suddenly judge that person. Those are the messages that we need to give our legislators. They need to sit down and have conversations with people who are in recovery, sit down with and have conversations with people who are actively using drugs and don't have an addiction, and sit down with people who are using drugs and have addictions and their families. And that's going to start to change, because when they see it for people, it changes everything.
Well,
I know
certainly hope that John Nygren would listen
Yeah.
especially with his daughter.
Well, now, I mean, we're coming up on election years. So if you look in terms of from a state perspective, what representatives are likely to come up for election, these are the times they have conversations with those that are running, as well as those who are currently holding those seats, and to bring it as part of their thoughts and platforms, because it's not going away.
Right. But
And
you have gerrymandering in your state?
oh, yes. Yes, we
Okay.
do.
Because we do here.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is, again, those are the problems. So we have to try to reach those that are hardest to reach. And those are the people who pass judgment. Every person I've ever met who has struggled with substance use, they're amazing people. Often some of the most creative people I've ever met. And we have to stop and look at what were the underlying connections and causes. If somebody had been physically or emotionally or sexually abused, generally we have compassion for that person. But when they discover substance abuse as a way to deal with it, now we judge that person for their way of coping. So we have to change that understanding and the connections. It doesn't just happen for no reason. There's always underlying connections and causes. And we have to remember for young people that they don't, that it doesn't have to be major trauma to be traumatic to them in their life. And that's a part that we don't understand, because we often look to, you know, if somebody's had a lot of adversity in their life, they're like, well, look at, I made it. Well, that's great. What did you have in your life that allowed you to be able to make it? And others don't have that. So they do find substances as a coping mechanism. And like I said, unfortunately, it works. It worked great in the beginning. So we need to help them to see it from a humanistic perspective. So I encourage you, don't give up. Keep talking, keep reaching out, increase your network, get support letters, get letters from all walks of substance use disorder, the people in recovery, people using drugs, their families, everybody, because we have to keep pushing this forward as a humanistic issue and the compassion that needs to go along with it in our medical, in our criminal process, as well as our communities.
All right. Are there any other questions? I know we're a little bit over 1:30, but are there any other questions for Nancy at this point?
My contact information is in the chat.
It
Please
is.
feel to reach out to me. My phone number is there, my email address. If you have questions, support, want to discuss more about what you can do in your communities, you know, please do reach out, because it has been grassroots that has changed so much of this, and we have to think of it for everybody.
That is such a true statement. It has been grassroots. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. And again, thank you so much, Nancy. We really, really appreciate it, and all your wisdom and insight. I could sit here and listen to you all. So.
Yeah, I said half hour, I can do it.
I know. All right. Well, thank you again, and everyone have a
Thank you.
good weekend.
Thank you. Good luck, Bev. And like I said, don't hesitate to reach out.
Okay, thank you.
All right. All right. Thank you, everyone. It's nice meeting you all. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.